We're going to talk now about the structure of the Psalms. So what I want you to do first is pause me for a second and take a moment to read through Psalms 1 and 2. And what I want you to do is think about these two Psalms as an introduction to the entire Psalter, because they lay out two very important things. The first one, Psalm 1, is an instruction for the life of faith. And so it tells you to be like a tree planted by a stream of water, to be nourished by Yahweh and nourished by righteous people, rather than being nourished by unrighteous people, for lack of a better way of saying it. So it's an instruction that kind of sets you up for success when you come to the Psalms. Hey, be this kind of person, the kind of person that is nurtured by righteousness, rather than the kind of person who is shipwrecked by unrighteousness, right? Then the next Psalm, Psalm 2, it sets you up for an understanding of Yahweh being in complete control of everything. It's much more corporate. This first one is more individual. The second one talks about Yahweh being seated on his throne and ruling over the nations. And so each nation, a corporate nation, right, and all of the kings of the earth should pay homage to Yahweh, because Yahweh is the most exalted one. Yahweh is in charge. And so read through these two Psalms and kind of think through how they might be indicating what the whole book is about. They're functioning as an introduction to this entire book. So they're saying, hey, you need to live the good life. You need to live a righteous life. And also Yahweh's in control. And that kind of sets the stage for what we're going to encounter in the rest of the Psalter. We're going to encounter difficulties through laments and huge deliverances by Yahweh through praises and hymns to the greatness of Yahweh. And each one of these different expressions in the Psalms is going to have both an individual expression to it. So you may hear in the Psalms, as you read through, somebody speaking on behalf of themselves and only speaking about themselves. Or you may hear a more corporate expression, and that is, here we all are together, here we all are bringing our praise. You do this even in church today. Sometimes it's like, just me and Jesus. I'm singing about just me and Jesus. Other times you're like, here we all are as a congregation together praising God for God's greatness. So some of that is what I want you to pick up here. You'll have to pause me because I'm going to keep talking about the structure, but do pause me and take a second to read through Psalms 1 and 2 and make note of how they kind of set you up for what's going to happen. Other things that you need to know about the structure of Psalms is that it's broken into 5 books, and these 5 books are intentional, it seems. Now remember that the Psalter was put together after the exile to be kind of a hymn book or a song book for the worshiping people of God. And so one of the things that whoever the editor was that brought it together, the first thing they did was they put these 2 Psalms at the beginning to kind of start you off in the right way. The next thing that they did was they broke the book of Psalms down into 5 books. So there are 5 parts to the book of Psalms, and it's meant to mirror the Torah. The Torah in the post-exilic period became very important, as you remember with Ezra. It was something that oriented people's lives, told them the right way to live, and the Psalms wants to reflect that. The book of Psalms is trying to reflect that in this 5-part structure. I certainly don't expect you to memorize which chapters in the Psalms belong to which book, but I do want you to keep in mind that there are 5 books in the Psalter. And the way that we know that is because each book in the Psalter ends with a doxology, and a doxology is a statement about God, the God of Israel, being wonderful, and just this outcry of blessed be the Lord. And so I have for you here the 5 different doxologies that in the Psalms, and you'll notice that they have really clear similarities. So the way that book 1 ends is to say, blessed be Yahweh, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Amen and amen. And then book 2 says something very similar and ends with amen and amen. And then book 3 is, of course, the briefest, but it says, blessed be Yahweh forever, amen and amen. And you can see the similarities between these, but they're each a little bit different. But this is our clue that the editor has intentionally put doxologies at the end of each book to let us know, hey, this is the close of one book and now the start of another. And then you'll notice that book 5 ends with, let everything that breathes praise Yahweh, praise Yahweh. So it's this totalizing effect when you get to the end of the Psalms, that it's just bringing everyone into the praise of Yahweh, just as each different book of the Psalms ends with a similar statement. So what you need to know from this is that there are 5 books in the Psalter, and the way that we know that is because each book, each collection, ends with a doxology. Now let's talk about the individual books themselves. Many scholars have asked, well, is there a purpose to this order? Is there a reason other than to mirror the Torah that we have 5 books? And some scholars have said, no, there's not really a reason for it. This is just like a way to break down all of the different hymns that the people of God have. Others have said, well, maybe the order is the 5-book structure is like a hymn book, and you'll notice if you have a hymnal in front of you that hymnals break down the different hymns that are available within them into categories. And so some people have said maybe that's what it's like. The one that we're going to go with is that the 5-book structure reflects history. And what it does is, if you read them carefully, you'll notice that in book 1, we're dealing primarily with David. In book 2, there's this sense that we have the united monarchy and things are good, under David and Solomon before Splitsville. And then in book 3, we've got the divided monarchy. So it seems that the monarchy has kind of failed. And then in book 4, we find out that it has failed. And then book 5, we have the return and this reconstitution of the people of God in the land of Canaan. So 5-part structure, and I'm going to take you through how these 5 books reflect the history right now. So book 1, Psalms 1 through 41, specifically in 3 through 41, they deal with David and the beginning of the nation of Israel. A lot of them are individual laments that are said to have been written by David, and they deal with David's struggle to become king, and the different enemies that he has to face, and a lot of them deal with just establishing this kingdom under David. Now, book 2 is a little bit different because we see this movement into David and Solomon and the united monarchy and the establishment of the monarchy. Here it's a struggle. We're trying to get the monarchy. Now we have a monarchy established in Israel, and these primarily deal with the establishment of the reign of Yahweh's king. So Psalm 72, the way that this ends, is a Psalm of Solomon, which we don't see very frequently. Usually they're Psalms of David or Asaph or Korah or someone like that. But Psalm 72 is a Psalm of Solomon. And it says at the end that the prayers of David, son of Jesse, have ended. So that's an indicator to you that we're moving into this established monarchy. Now, book 3 is going to deal primarily with the divided monarchy, when things kind of started to fall apart. And it has a lot of heartfelt and communal psalms. And so this people of God vying with and trying to deal with this reality of kind of broken vision. They were supposed to be one, ruled by one God-ordained king, and things are kind of falling apart. And the way that book 3 ends is with the utter failure of the monarchy. Now look at what we've been through so far. We've been struggling for a monarchy, have a monarchy established, start to see the monarchy crumble. And it's going to all culminate with the exile, which is a very terrible reality. And that's the way that book 4 begins, with the reality of the destroyed temple. It's a lament over the destruction of the temple. And one of the things that you're going to notice as you move through book 4 Psalms 90 to 106, is that there's this renewed focus on Moses, which is strange, right? Because we've just been focusing on David, and Moses predates David. One of the reasons that this happens is because the Psalter is looking back to a time before the monarchy to kind of try to reestablish things and hoping for a new exodus, a new way out of this foreign land. And there's this sense in which the people are going to have to rely upon God for survival. They no longer have a king. And so they look back to a time before there was a king under Moses and what life was like then. So that's what you're feeling with book 4. Now, book 5 is a bit more joyful because book 4 was very sad. We've got a lot of communal laments there. But book 5 has thanksgiving for deliverance. So lots of thanksgiving psalms. Yahweh, thank you so much. And the primary focus here is not on David and not on Solomon and not on Moses, but rather on Yahweh as the new king that will lead them into their new reality back in the land. And so you've noticed so far that in Isaiah, we had this kind of hope for that bottom part of the sandwich, that Cyrus would be the answer to that anointed one, that Messiah. And then we saw in Ezra this kind of hopefulness that maybe Sheshbazzar, maybe Zerubbabel, maybe those guys would reestablish the kingdom. In the Psalter, we've got a totally different answer. The Psalter says, stop looking for a human king. Rather, you need to live as if Yahweh is your king. And that kind of goes back to Psalm 2, right? That introduced the whole thing. Yahweh is king not only over you, but over all nations. And if we make Yahweh king, we will survive in this new world, in this new reality in which Persia is in charge and we don't necessarily have that bottom part of the sandwich and everything's a little wibbly wobbly. But if we can just make Yahweh king, then things will go well for us. So that kind of gives you a broad swath of the structure of the Psalter. It moves you from the time when David is vying to be king, lots of individual laments there, and then moves us all the way through to book 5, where there are communal thanksgiving because the people have returned to the land, and now the hope that they have is that Yahweh will be their king. The sense in the Psalter is that the monarchy failed, and so we need to establish Yahweh as king. So that's what you have for structure. I hope you enjoyed it.